So I was reading this article that was published by Haaretz on Israeli war crimes committed in the Netzarim corridor, which is a 7-kilometer strip of land that runs across northern Gaza. And the article talks about Israeli war crimes, and it quotes all of these IDF soldiers who served in the Netzarim corridor. And these soldiers recount the atrocities that they witnessed. And the most disturbing thing that I read is that there are competitions between IDF units over how many people they can kill. And before you say, well, Ted, they're killing terrorists, these IDF soldiers don't care if they kill civilians. And this is something that the soldiers who were interviewed by Haaretz made known, that these war criminals don't care if they slaughter civilians. And in one case, they killed about 200 people. And then they went to go analyze the bodies, and they concluded that out of the 200 dead people, only 10 were actual Hamas combatants. The rest of them were just civilians. They don't give a damn. And in one story, they saw a father who was walking with his 2 kids, and they killed the father and they killed the 2 kids. And you have these commanders in the IDF who tell their people, oh, don't worry about killing civilians because they're all terrorists. It's open season on them. And so they make a sport out of killing. And it reminded me of the story that I read when I was reading about the rape of Nanking, which was one of the most horrific things that's ever happened in modern history. The rape of Nanking was a giant war crime that was committed by Imperial Japan during the Second World War. And the Japanese Imperial Army entered the city of Nanking, which was the capital of China at that time, and they proceeded to butcher hundreds of thousands of people. In the midst of this slaughter, there were 2 Japanese generals who decided to have a competition over how many Chinese civilians they could behead. And that actually happened. You can read about it. And that evil is in Israel, because Israel is possessed by a demon. And Israel will continue to be more and more demonically possessed. And the possession is going to increase. It's like that parable that Jesus said. He said, this generation is like a man who is possessed by one demon, and that one demon leaves his body and comes back with 7 more, and that man is now even more possessed. And he says, this is how this generation is. And he was speaking of the generation that lived in Israel at that time. And that demonic presence is back. That generation is returning. That generation that killed Christ is coming back from the dead, and it's like a bunch of zombies. When you read about how in Israel these Israeli soldiers sodomized a Palestinian detainee, and then when the police came over to arrest those soldiers for committing that crime, an entire mob of Jewish fanatics rushed the camp where these soldiers were about to be arrested. They rushed the camp to defend the sodomizers, to defend the rapists. And you read that, and it's quite obvious. Israel has become Sodom. Israel is Sodom. What was one of the evils of Sodom? They wanted to rape men. And in Israel, they believe that an Israeli soldier has the right to rape a Palestinian man because they deem Palestinians as terrorists.
זה מעניין לי את העכוז, לא, מה עושים לבחורצ'יק הזה.
מה? זה מה שבאמת מעניין אותך?
חד משמעית. אני אתן לי
אני אסביר.
חיילים שמבצעים עבירה, חשודים בעבירה של אינוס, בעצור כפות. זה לא מעניין אותך?
יפה.
לא מעניין אותך תואר המידות של החיילים שלנו? אגב, אלה לא חיילים, אם הם עשו את זה, הם לא חיילים, הם עבריינים.
בגדול, עוד פעם, זה מעניין לי את העכוז מה עשו לאיש חמאס הזה. אני כל הזמן זוכר, קודם כל, הדבר היחיד שמבחינתי הוא בעיה פה, זה שזו לא איזושהי מדיניות מוסדרת של המדינה.
And what does St. John say about Israel? What does he say about Jerusalem? He says, Jerusalem, where our Lord was crucified, Jerusalem, which is Sodom and Egypt, and Israel is Sodom. It's this evil country. And you go back to the parable that Jesus said. A man is possessed by one demon, and 7 more return and possess him. And he says, so it is with this generation. And what happened to that generation that Jesus spoke of? That generation would go on to kill Jesus Christ. So right there, it showed its own demonic possession. And then that very generation would go on to kill itself in the Roman-Judean War. During the Roman-Judean War, it wasn't just Jews fighting Romans. It was, to a great extent, Jews killing each other. For a huge chunk of that war, it was a civil war. I spoke too soon. For a huge chunk of that war, it was a civil war, and the Jews were butchering each other. The Jews were butchering each other. And Josephus tells us that when the Jews would kill each other, they would see it as a sign of masculinity to butcher people by the droves. And in one story that I read in that article published by Haaretz, it speaks about how this soldier felt really bad about the fact that his fellow soldiers were killing civilians, and he didn't like that. And when he expressed his objection, the other soldiers called him a coward. They said, "You're a coward." So in their minds, it's masculine to kill civilians. They see it as a sign of masculinity. And so you see this demonic presence in Israel, and it's only getting worse. And it's just like that generation that Jesus spoke of when he said the parable. A man is possessed by one demon, and then 7 more enter him. Which means that that generation that killed Christ only became more demonically possessed. And Israel is going to become more and more demonically possessed. And you see it with the rise of Jewish fanaticism, and you see it with the increase of these lunatics in Israel. And these very Jewish fanatics, they want to kill all the Arabs, they want to kill all of the Christians, they want to destroy all of the churches in Israel, they want to make Israel into a giant Talmudic state, and they want to establish not Sharia law, but co-Sharia law, co-Sharia law. It's a little play on words there. Not Sharia law, co-Sharia law. And you have these Christians who want to sit there and they want to focus on Islam and Muslims all day. Muslims can be bad, don't get me wrong. Islam is bad, don't get me wrong. But you guys don't focus on Jewish lunacy and Jewish fanaticism. You guys want to talk about Sharia law, but you guys don't want to talk about co-Sharia law. And that's the sickness of the American Zionist Christians. A lot of these American Zionist Christians are evil. If they're not naive, they're evil. It's just the reality. If they're not naive, they're evil. Because if you bring up the fact that Israel is committing atrocities in Gaza, they'll have the same responses. They'll say, that's a lie, the media lies, yet if the media confirms one of their own biases, then they'll believe the media. But when the media reports something that goes against their own worldview, they will say, "Oh, the media is lying. I don't believe that," and so they'll just dismiss everything. "I don't believe that. That's bullshit. I don't believe it." And they will sit there and make little of the evils committed by Israel. And this is why I say Zionist Christians are either evil or they are naive. And if they're naive, then hopefully they will see the truth and get red-pilled on this dark reality, the dark reality of co-Sharia law. And there's a lot of evil out there, and the fact is that America is supporting it. The entire American Christian Zionist empire is promoting it, and it's just sickening, guys. It's absolutely sickening. But we are facing the synagogue of Satan. That's what we're facing, the synagogue of the devil. And the entire American conservative apparatus is trying to get us to support this evil country, this evil nation called Israel, this nation that embraces Sodom. It's arguably the most pro-Sodom country on earth. It's a nation where sex trafficking is allowed. It's just a very sick nation. It's a nation that praises the mass slaughter of civilians. The mass slaughter of civilians. It's a nation that will mock the deaths of civilians. It's a nation where IDF soldiers will have competitions over how many people they can kill, and that's considered a good thing. It's embraced as cool and awesome and masculine in today's Israeli society, and it's only going to get worse. One of the good things is that a lot more people are wising up to the reality of the synagogue of Satan. The only problem is that we are living in something of a post-Christian society. I wish people could just realize that the synagogue of Satan is a real thing and that Israel is evil, and not go down the road towards Hitlerianism. But we live in a dark time, and as more and more people start realizing that Israel is a problem, more and more people are going to turn to Nazism, and that's another side of this problem. That's another side of this problem. So if people could just realize Israel's evil, and then they could just embrace what Christianity says and not go down the road towards Nazism, that would be great. If we can be just critical of Israel without subscribing to Nazism, that would be great. But sadly, that's just not the case that we're in, and too many people are going down the opposite extreme. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys have just heard some theology. God bless.